Greetings, fellow Homo sapiens. I'm here today with Amita Nathwani. Amita is a Ayurvedic practitioner, a professor, an author, and a nutrition specialist. Culinary specialist, nutrition specialist. Amita, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
It's really great to speak with you. I've been hanging out with you here in Tucson, Arizona for the last few weeks. You and your sister have really come through for me in this moment of healthcare need. And I am now vaccinated, fully vaccinated, thanks to this amazing tag team effort. And what's extra special about it is that your dad is my family doctor from earliest childhood memories. So there is some continuity in this that's really quite special. Anyway, so we should maybe start off by giving people a bit of a background on what it is you do. You are involved in a lot of things. Let's start with Ayurveda, I guess, because in the time I've spent with you here, I've been trying to wrap my head around these doshas, and I think, based on what I can understand, it seems like pretty central to understanding Ayurveda itself. So can you start by explaining that maybe a bit?
Sure. And I thank you so much for having me on. And it has also been very, very fun and very special to be here with you and get to reconnect with you again. It's so interesting that you ask me out of the gate about doshas. I'm not going to be afraid to say that here in the West, we have a tendency to really lean hard on these body types. And as a classically trained Ayurvedic provider, I would really like to help break that myth, because in the true classical sense, these doshas, which I will go through to explain, can oftentimes be just misinterpreted as body types that then we unnecessarily cling to in order to justify why we are the way that we are, but it also can oftentimes get in the way of us understanding that these doshas play a role in our disease process as well. And what they are may not necessarily match with what our constitution truly is. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to start with that out of the gate because in the West here, mm-hmm. We practice Ayurveda very differently than the way it's practiced back in India.
Okay.
And in India, although we do focus on these doshas, which again I'll get to in a second, mm-hmm. We find more and more that as we want to identify with something, that we can really help ourselves understand ourselves, these doshas provide a window into who we are. Mm-hmm. And as long as we don't cling to them unnecessarily, they can be a really useful tool.
Okay.
And so I'm very happy to talk about them mm-hmm. and how they are really wrapped up into this greater understanding of Ayurveda.
Cool.
So Ayurvedic medicine, it is about 5,000 years old, they say, and its principles are quite universal. And from a more philosophical standpoint, we actually say that all that exists in this entire world are the 5 elements, and everything else is perception. Mm-hmm. And there are texts written all about this. But these 5 elements are what shape the doshas as we know it today. Okay. So the elements are earth, fire, water, air, and ether. And they all have their very unique characteristics. So like, for example, air. And by the way, I have seen Ornab outside. I'm going to make some side notes about you. I have seen Ornab outside in the dry, hot air of Arizona, and he enjoys the heat, but as soon as the wind picks up, he just swiftly gets up and goes inside. And that was what I told him to do if he saw any like wild animals.
Oh man, I really enjoyed the javelina talk. That was like, I've been sharing that with everybody. And I verbatim what you told me. It's like, if you see any javelinas, just get up and go inside. And I think that it's just, that sounds like funny advice. I've yet to see one. I've seen a bunch of bunnies. I think I saw a roadrunner.
Nice.
You know.
Yeah, you don't have to go inside for those guys. But Ornab is very wind in his nature. He's very light and airy. For those of you who know him or have ever met him too, his physique, he's lanky. He has drier skin, but he thinks outside.
Do I? I have dry skin. I suppose I do.
Yeah. I'm doing his assessment right here as we're talking.
This is good. I like it.
Yeah, but he likes to think outside the box. This is a very air quality, moving, changeable. And air has to move within a cavity, and this is what we call space. So this combination of air and space is classified as a vata, V-A-T-A.
Okay.
So oftentimes what we see is people have a lot of characteristics that are very vata. They are changeable, they're dry, they're moving, variable, everything that air represents. If you even just like put wind on your arm, what it does is it dries any moisture that might be there and actually cools down the skin. So people who are more vata by nature, they tend to be colder.
Okay.
So just to give your audience a little reference, we had a huge heat wave here where it was like 45 degrees Celsius.
I was loving it.
115 degrees Fahrenheit, and our vata boy over here was like baking.
I was laying out on that concrete tile
On
out there.
concrete.
Really enjoying it.
Yeah.
It was very enjoyable.
Whereas some of the other constitutions wouldn't be able to do that.
Well, everyone seems to be complaining about this heat, and I love it. I just keep saying, my computer doesn't like it. That's the only thing, But just to clarify before you continue, so vata, that would be one of the doshas?
That is one of the doshas.
Okay.
Now, consider this though, right? So anything that moves in the body. So this also represents respiration, elimination, circulation, transport between cells. Whether or not you have characteristics like Ornab, you still have all of these other aspects in the physiology and anatomy of the body. So we all have vata within us. We all have all the systems and organs that represent movement and transportation and change. Okay. Having a cough is a vata ailment.
Okay.
Having constipation can be a vata ailment because the proper upward movement and downward movement is stuck. Having anxiety is a vata disorder because it affects the central nervous system.
Okay.
So if we were to just say that only 1/3 of the population is allowed to have anxiety because they fit into this box, it would be untrue.
Yeah.
We can have a lot of these vatic type of disorders regardless of whatever our constitution is.
So I guess what the main point to take away when talking about these doshas is that it's not to be taken as rigid, like the way you described me just now as like a kind of vata type. That doesn't mean that that's all that I should be thinking about, or that that's all that I am, or that I should always only be applying, that framework to myself. Is that kind of correct or?
Correct,
Yeah.
because we have to dance with the changes of life. If you had an unfortunate event happen in your life and somebody you knew passed away, this grief and depression you experience, that is a kaphic issue. This is what we call kapha, which is almost the opposite of vata. It's more grounded, it's more stable, it's more downward. So as opposed to anxiety, which creates more of a unknown effect in the body, there's a lot of worry, overthinking. Depression can actually go into shut down. It is normal, and this is homeostasis, for you to experience all of the doshas at any given time in your life in order for you to be the best version of yourself that you can, whether you're reaching homeostasis physiologically or emotionally and mentally.
That's a good way of saying it, that you will experience all of the doshas in some form or another, regardless of if
you have tendencies
more towards one.
Bingo.
Okay.
Right? You just happen to be a fantastic example of a vata constitution.
Right.
And it is because this man, he loves the heat. He does think outside the box. Ornab doesn't have much trouble keeping weight off. And this is more of vatas in their natural state. They tend to have higher metabolisms, not the highest, but also patients who come in to see me who are vata, my first entry of diagnosis occurs when obviously I talk to them on the phone or get an email or what have you. But when they give me their intake form, which is one of the methods of diagnosis, we call it prashna, just questioning. When I get their intake form and every answer is sometimes, maybe, depends.
That sounds like me. Yeah. Oh, so I guess you must be getting to it. What are some of the you mentioned kapha? So how many more are there and what are they?
There's 3 in total.
Okay.
So let's hit the next one, which let's go in the order.
Yeah.
So the next one that we talk about is represented by more fire, that element of fire. Fire and water. There's again a lot of esoteric philosophical texts written about how fire cannot exist alone, both metaphorically and physiologically. So fire and water together make up what's called pitta, Pitta. So vata is Vata, pitta, Pitta. Pitta is fire. So if you think about that, even in terms of what it represents, it's hot, it's sharp, it can create change. You put something in the fire, it transforms. So the systems and organs that it represents in the body are everything that converts. Production of enzymes, production of hormones, digestion, metabolism, and then the organs of transformation as well, like the heart and also the liver. The eyes too. The eyes are the very first organ of perception. What we see and how our eyes are able to refract the light to observe from our own perspective is also not something that just moves from one point to the other, but we convert it into our own understanding. And so pitta represents that. So people who are more pitta by nature have that same way about them. They see the problem, they see the solution, no brainer.
Right.
Their bodies do it too. They wake up in the morning and they're hungry and they eat. If they don't eat at the same time every day, they get maybe a little hangry. Blood sugar can drop quickly, and they need to be active very differently than vatas. Vatas are naturally active, like Ornab, you're very, you move. You know, you'll get up and you'll sit down and then you'll move. You love to walk, right? Pittas like to be more athletic. Vatas love to dance, but pittas like linear motion. Cycling, swimming, running, things like that. Pittas convert energy quickly, so they build muscle. They build muscle mass where they become lean. Whereas when vatas go to the gym and they build muscle mass, it's difficult for them to continue to keep it on. They could work out all day, right? And then they come out of the gym like, oh, nothing really happened. And they may develop it. They can increase that pitta quality. They can rev up their metabolism, but it doesn't last because by nature, that's not where they tend toward. So pittas tend to be the ones who get very lean very quickly. So my patients, for example, I don't love to use weight loss as a starting point, but it tends to resonate with a lot of people. If someone wants to lose weight, in some cases, I say, yes, weightlifting would be good. In other cases, it actually will increase weight. And in other cases, it will do nothing at all.
Yeah, I remember encountering this just with regards to certain exercises where sometimes, you know, it wouldn't apply to me, but I'd be hearing somebody else talking about wanting to get a six-pack, so they wanted to do lots of sit-ups. And then my other friend, who was a big gym head, he was doing like kinesiology or something, and he was just saying, like, if you don't do cardio, no one's going to be able to see a six-pack that you have because it's just going to actually make you look a bit bigger. Because, you know, unless you do some kind of cardio, I guess. Now that's just some weird anecdotal thing that I heard, but yeah, it makes sense for like certain body type exercises. It's going to make you look bigger,
right?
Yeah.
exactly.
Certain kind of exercise, I guess.
Certain kinds, and it depends. And we'll really talk about exercise because I have had the pleasure of introducing you to my sport, and it being Muay Thai. And
thank you so much for that, by the way. It introducing. I've had so much fun training with Josh. And just to your earlier point about my Vata-like nature, what we've noticed in this training is that I just have very poor balance. I just fly away, that's a big aspect. And even in yoga, same thing. The balancing is just the difficult part. I'm just kind of not, I'm just going to feel like I'm going to fly away. So that anyway, you were saying about Muay Thai.
Yeah. So it can change people's bodies differently in different ways. And I love just seeing how one sport can affect different people. That's all. And so we can delve a little more into that. But, Pitta, people who tend to be more Pitta in nature tend to enjoy sports that lean them out. So, small amounts of lifting helps them quite a bit. They get lean, but also they have a fire inside. So if they do not exercise, they will spontaneously combust.
Oh, yeah?
I always talk about my Pitta friends this way. I go, oh, I know. You need to get up and go do something. Go do it. I'll be here when you get back. I'm Kapha. I'll be here when you get back. And Vatas are like, I'm already gone. I already did it and came back. And then did it again.
It's interesting to look at, while being cognizant of not applying this too rigidly to people, it can be quite fun to, it just as a joke or whatever pseudo joke, put your friends in these categories and be like, oh, look what you're,
right.
And it's that's fun.
And actually, I'm so glad you brought that up because, oftentimes, so I teach psychiatry fellows who at medical schools who are interested in doing integrative medicine tracks.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when I give them the introduction to Ayurveda, I always end the little intro about the doshas by saying, okay, so why are we learning this? What's the point, right? Really, the point is just to have compassion.
Yeah.
We all have this really bad habit of wanting everybody to be the way that we want them to be, or if I think this way, then other people. But when you start to see that we really are different from one another. This is one of the best tools that Ayurveda provides for us, is that it gives us the ability to say, oh, he's like that only.
He's like that only. I like it. It makes sense. Radical acceptance. Yeah, I guess.
So the Pitta disorders are more inflammatory by nature.
Okay.
So acid reflux, gout, even heart disease, cancer is an inflammatory disease that can affect all people. Again, just because you're Pitta doesn't mean that's the disease, that process you'll have to go through, nor does it mean that somebody else can't. So Pitta constitutions tend to be, Vatas are artists, they're dreamers, they're inventors, they're musicians, or now if you're fitting into this cliche box.
It's a bit much at this point.
Yeah, I think I've contradicted myself quite a bit.
Between Vata and Gemini, it's like a little bit like I'm trying my best over here.
Yeah. He's like that only.
Yeah, there you go.
So the next one is more Kapha related, and Kapha is earth and water. These are the elements. So if you think about the elements related with earth and water, they're actually cool in nature, not unlike the cold Vata. So I love the heat.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I moved to Arizona.
Yeah.
However, the other thing I really like is I love the dryness, and I also love the wind.
Okay.
Because the wind dries up all the moisture that I chronically have in my body. Oilier skin, Vatas tend to be more thin in nature. The Pitta constitution is more lean, and the Kapha constitution tends to be rounder. And so it really helps me to feel lighter in this dry, hot climate that opposes all the things that I am. So if you lived in a warm, humid climate, that would be more where you would shine.
That's why I love Bombay.
Yeah.
So, when you describe it that way in terms of a body type, is there any point in drawing an analogy to this Western notions of, say, what is it, ectomorph, mesomorph, and then there's a third one? No.
Yeah, there is.
What's the
endomorph?
Yeah, that's the one. So is there a parallel there that makes sense? Or?
Yes, I have absolutely seen some beautiful parallels there, and beautifully articulated from a Western standpoint. Yeah, Ayurveda brings in some other elements of nature and food, and so all the food we eat can be vata, pitta, or kapha as well. So the kapha constitution is slow and steady wins the race.
Okay.
So while the vatas are coming up with the ideas and pittas are there saying, okay, how are we going to execute this, right? The engineers, like, let's build a bridge and make it go from here. Vatas are the ones who get in the assembly line and they put it together. Kaphas. And kaphas tend to be a little bit more rigid, almost the opposite of vata, right? Vatas are like, let's fly, and kaphas are like, whoa, I can't eat something different for breakfast. And they tend to dig their heels. So a lot of times, I have a lot of compassion. Obviously, I'm kapha in my nature. I have a lot of compassion for people who are considered lazy because it literally takes more inertia for us to get past a threshold than it does for other constitutions.
Right.
But what we do then is we see that within ourselves and we start to make changes. So just kind of finishing off this more kaphic constitution. Vatas eat any time of the day. Pittas need structure. And kaphas, believe it or not, can go and fast all day long and then eat one ginormous meal at the end of the day. Their blood sugar does not rise or drop very quickly because their metabolism is so slow. They tend to eat not very much by nature unless kapha has increased too much. And then they will eat a lot. Okay. Growths on the body, depression, obesity, fatigue, these are all kaphic issues. So a woman who's going through perimenopause, who is pitta by nature and is feeling fatigued, she has a kaphic symptom based on what kind of pathology, we don't know. It depends on the person's constitution and what disorder got created to manifest into a kapha problem.
Okay. So there's like, you just described some hypothetical diagnosis. And this seems like a really good framework for zoning in on the individual and their specific constitution. And then would you then combine this with like more modern practices, or like where does this intersect? Like, I guess the integrated part.
Sure.
How does that fit together with what we're doing today in 2021?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I'll just kind of a side caveat here. I'm trained classically in Ayurveda, but I do have to tell the story of how I grew up as in a family of, my father and extended family, all physicians in Western medicine. So when I chose to go into Ayurveda, my dad had a condition, and that was that in my spare time, when I wasn't, studying hard, learning what I was learning in school, I had to go through my whole series of pathophysiology and etiology 101, 102. And anytime I had breaks, my father would quiz me so that I had a greater awareness of the understanding of the disease process from a Western medicine standpoint. And I'm so fortunate. I feel really lucky that I had the ability to be able to learn that, because in true traditional forms of medicine like Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, I'll throw that in the mix, oftentimes we can't make the comparison. We can't even talk about it because how we look at an organ is completely different how somebody else looks at an organ. And so what I've done over time is created these pathways in which I can articulate and communicate why it is we do what we do in Ayurveda and relate it back to how conventional medicine looks at a disease and treats it. And so this is my background, and which is why I work, fairly well in teaching medical students or other people in healthcare fields about Ayurveda more from a standpoint of how they can apply it to their own Western pathophysiology. Okay. So I have to say that in order to jump into this whole integrative approach.
Yeah. And you teach at U of A, right?
I do.
University of Arizona.
So the University of Arizona, and there's a very specific department called the Dr. Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. Dr. Andrew Weil is a very well-known physician who was on the forefront of beginning integrative medicine in this country many years ago, and showing how intervention and prevention don't have to be exclusive of one another, and they could go hand in hand together.
Well, that's a big one. I mean, I want to come back to that later. Yeah.
So I guess on that note too, that's how I enjoy practicing. So Ayurveda has excellent diagnostic tools. We do pulse diagnosis. We ask a lot of questions, and of course, we look at the patient. So darshan, and many people know this word. They're going to get darshan. They're going to be seen by somebody holy. But darshan means just to be seen, observed, and not just like physically, let me look at your tongue, let me look in your ears, but also how the patient is dressed and how they walk in. Are they early? Are they late? What is their speech and their mannerisms? These are types of intentional interviewing, or motivational interviewing is what it's called oftentimes today. And so Ayurveda really shines in that department, because what we're able to do is really see the patient for who they are and meet them where they are. Once we've had an opportunity to look at their constitution, and caveat here, many Ayurvedic philosophies do not even look at a person's constitution. They are only looking at the disorder.
Right.
And in many cases, I do the same thing. A patient will walk out the door and say, "You didn't even tell me what my constitution was." And I'll say, "Don't worry about it. Let's just resolve the problem."
Yeah.
Because the problem has nothing to do with your constitution.
Yeah.
There's literally a problem going on, and we need to resolve it. Yeah. I'm relating it back to the doshas, but not in terms of their constitution, but in terms of how is this disorder related from a doshic standpoint.
Right.
Right. So, and so then I really enjoy I love Western diagnostics as well. And these are great markers, I think, for my patients to be able to utilize. I like to be, oftentimes someone who says, based on your pulse, I think it might be time for you to go get a DEXA scan, which is a bone density scan that is often done for individuals who are experiencing any type of arthritis or symptoms of it. And so, there are a lot of people who come to me that are not willing to go into the world of Western diagnosis because they're afraid of what their doctor might say. And I'm here to say, there's no need to be afraid. When we find out the big picture of what's going on, then we will have more tools to be able to address it. I can still address it from an Ayurvedic perspective. I also do not shy away from looking at a patient and saying, "Hey, grab your coat. Let's get in my car. I'm going to take you to the emergency room. You're about to have a heart attack." And that also is where Western medicine comes into place, because when we are looking at emergency situations, I don't want to see a patient who's broken their leg. This is not the care that I do. But once upon a time in traditional Ayurveda, we did surgery. We did all these parasurgery techniques. That's what we were there for, the full care. And now we have wonderful facilities. We have advances in technology. It's wonderful that patients have an opportunity to increase their longevity of life and increase their happiness and their lifespan. And I'm here to help as a component of that.
Has that actually happened where someone's come to see you and you've been like, actually, you're going to have a heart attack?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, are you allowed to describe that situation or, like that? Because did you just look at me like this person's going to have a heart attack in X number of minutes? Or
Yes. And there are some markers that we do look at.
the person had no idea?
They knew they were in distress.
Okay.
They just didn't know what the distress was.
Right.
Yeah. And there are markers of looking at the eyes or perhaps seeing throbbing veins and things like that, indicate shortness of breath and then the pulse. In Ayurveda, we really rely heavily on pulse diagnosis, and it oftentimes can let us know what's going on with a patient.
And that's basically how you put it to the person? You were like, listen, get your coat on. We're going to go to the emergency room.
That's what I did in that situation.
And you said, did you actually say you're going to have a heart attack?
I did say that.
Wow. That's quite a scenario.
And this is where a lot of, and this is where again I'm very grateful for my training because I take what I do very seriously. A lot of times, again, in the West, Ayurveda is like, yeah, I practice Ayurveda, and then there's like, here's some herbs and here's this and here's that, but really understanding pathology is important in order to practice true medicine. And even though my scope of practice is not as great as an emergency care doc or even an MD in that capacity, I can help facilitate prevention and then also be an avenue through which I can say, I think this is the point at which we take it to the next level. And I'm not ever afraid to tell someone that. Many of my conventional peers think I'm a little woo-woo, and many of my alternative peers think that I'm a little too conventional. And I am glad of both.
Well, I'm glad you kind of touched on this, and I maybe would like you to elaborate on this a bit more, because there's like the Ayurvedic medicine, and I guess, and maybe you can correct me with this term, what they call alternative medicine. I don't know if those categories make sense, but there is this weird mushy area that you alluded to, where you have these people that, I practice Ayurveda, here's some herbs, and then you are a much more rigorous practitioner, but that world exists, I guess. So how do you negotiate that world? Like, let's say, okay, so you have this ancient practice, and it is reinterpreted in the modern and a Western context, but then obviously there's a bastardization that can happen. So how do you negotiate that world? And then how do you mentioned, like your more conventional friends thinking you're a bit woo-woo. Can you just, talk like a little bit more about that? Because I find that tension interesting. And
yeah, absolutely. And maybe I can touch on this small thing before I kind of get into more. The value of understanding these doshas, right, is that not only do we have vata, pitta, kapha within all of us, like we all have respiration, elimination, we all have transformation, metabolism, digestion, we all have like the structure of the body, bones, muscles, tissues, tendons. But the thing is that even with us having all those things, the primary reason that we understand it all is because it exists in the world, in the natural world as we know it. So it exists in the food that we eat, and it exists in the herbs that we take. We can help adjust our dosha by a particular movement that we make or exercise, right? We just talked about that earlier. Yeah. And so some of these tools and techniques of balancing the body, those have been taught really well in the West.
Okay.
Lifestyle, diet. I'm sure you're familiar with oil pulling.
I was going to ask you about that a little bit later, because that's that's a big impact you've had on my life, is the oil pulling. I want to come back to that a bit later.
Okay.
What was I just about to ask you?
But the lifestyle piece is big.
Well, yeah, it really is, and there's the reason why this tension is interesting to me is there are some scenarios where it seems like both schools are kind of almost come to the same conclusion. Like if you look at things like about the microbiome and how that's like really specific for every person, you have like a certain, so like that seems like a new way of thinking in Western medicine where it's like more tailored to each individual, which seems really consonant with the consonant, yeah, like harmonious at least with the idea of looking at a person's constitution and tailoring something specific to that person. So is there a sense in which these as we go on further, more and more merging might happen with
what I think, it's like anything else in this world, right? Politics or what have you. We've got some people on this side of the spectrum. They are stating that you have a disease, no problem. We can take care of it with herbs and essential oils and lifestyle, and you will be cured.
Okay.
And then we've got the other end of the spectrum, folks, maybe from a more conventional standpoint, who say, you have a disease, no problem. We've got a pharmaceutical drug for that, and we can take care of it. And they exist on both ends of the spectrum. But what everybody forgets, or at least there's the people in the middle, where we stop and say, okay, actually, let's look to see how far the disease process has gone. And shall we stay within this realm and maybe be a little bit more aggressive with herbal therapies and look at the pathology differently? Or has it gone on too far that we might refer to conventional medicine and have somebody look at their pathology from their standpoint, and perhaps then they can be more aggressive with pharmaceuticals. So there is this middle road that many of us actually really sit in. And it's more commonly spoken by naturopathic. Naturopathic doctors are great with sitting in both worlds. They still really, lean on more herbal therapies, but they do a really fantastic job with bridging the gap. But then you've got, the end of the spectrum, and a lot of it is lost in translation. How is someone who has studied Ayurveda in Sanskrit going to possibly explain or relate to why this disease process could or could not be taken care of from a different standpoint? So because there's a lot lost in translation, and then of course we have media, and we have this $5 billion nutraceutical companies out there, and that are the industry that's giving people their health in their own hands, while we see the Western pharmaceutical and AMA infrastructure collapse on itself. It's becoming convoluted, and all I can do in that is maintain that there is a time and a place for everything.
Yeah.
And for prevention purposes, we use these beautiful techniques of Ayurveda are there. And I will oftentimes even refer many of my patients to a lot of Western Ayurvedic practitioners, because they are skilled in being able to explain these techniques like oil pulling and when, what the routine looks like, what diet, all of this. Whereas I'm going to go a little bit more into the pathology.
Right. Okay, cool. So I think I need to publicly acknowledge on this podcast your contribution to my life in the domain of oil pulling, among others. Like, as we mentioned at the beginning, I am now fully vaccinated thanks to you and your care. But the oil pulling thing is funny. So I have really bad teeth. I have a thing against the whole dental profession, I think. I've just had such bad experiences my whole life. I have, I think, upwards of 20 fillings in my mouth. I have 1 root canal and like 3 crowns. And around 2013, I think it was my first root canal. I've only ever had the one, but I was really frustrated because I floss all the time. The name of my production company is Floss Daily Productions. I take care of my teeth. Now, I do have some bad habits that I have, like smoking. I used to drink a lot of sugary beverages. I don't so much anymore. Although the last couple of weeks in America has been
You're in America, baby.
Yeah. Lots of Dr. Pepper has been happening. But so I got really frustrated because I had had so many feelings in my life, and the thing that I've come to realize about the dental industry, it feels more, do you need water? Go for it. Just get one. There's one bottle of water right here.
I wanted some fizzy water.
Oh, there's no more left. You can just have the rest of this.
Okay.
Yeah. I've also have embraced this sparkling water culture here, which I never thought I would. But anyway, so I was super frustrated, and like the dental industry, it seems everything is an engineering solution instead of a medical solution. Forget preventative. It's like we're gonna drill a hole here and install this structure, and then it's like, my goodness. Mm-hmm. Anyway, my teeth have been butchered over the years to varying degrees, and so I was so frustrated, and so I decided to look for what other solutions are there, and I came across oil pulling, described really weirdly in an article, and then I researched it a bit more, and it was around the time when Gwyneth Paltrow was really advocating for it. And so I went down that rabbit hole briefly. And so I was like, okay, I will try this. Despite my reservations about Gwyneth Paltrow, I'll try this. And I think I just had put a Facebook status asking if anybody had tried oil pulling, or maybe I even asked you directly. I can't remember. And the craze at that time, and even people to this day, a lot of people use coconut oil. And so I was like, what's this deal about coconut oil? Does it work? And you said to me, don't waste your time with that coconut oil. You got to get on that sesame oil. And I'm like, hey, sesame, okay, really? And he's like, yeah, sesame oil is the best. It's got to be cold pressed and unrefined. So I went out looking for this, and it was really hard to find at that time. In 2013, although within a year, it started to get easier. You could go to certain shops and there'd be sesame oil for oil pulling, written on the thing, even though it's just...
Gwyneth Paltrow did that.
We can thank Gwyneth Paltrow. But so
and her candles too.
Let's not talk about the candles. There's a really funny YouTube video about some guy who ordered that candle, and that he's covered that topic more thoroughly than anybody could or should.
Okay, back to sesame oil.
Yeah. So it's available, and I was blown away by how this works. It seems to work. What I'm seeing when I put this oil in my mouth and I spit it out, it really looks like it's doing something, and my mouth feels much better. And what supports my feeling that this is working even more is that if I buy an inferior oil, if I buy sesame oil, but it's not cold pressed, or it's not unrefined, or if it's just not as good quality, it doesn't work as well. And my mouth doesn't feel good after I do this. So this has been something that, it's done wonders for my oral hygiene, and I'm pretty committed to it. I'm pretty sure it works. I tried to look into if there was research about this, and there really isn't. I think there was maybe one study done that said it was kind of inconclusive, and it seems like a lot of conventional dental practitioners, dentists, and so on don't take this very seriously. But they do take the idea of giving you way more fillings than you need very seriously. So that's my little rant about the dental industry and how I found oil pulling. You guided me towards sesame oil. Can you talk about a little bit about how oil pulling works and why it works?
Sure. Yeah. And again, this is where Ayurveda really shines, when we start to look at the natural world around us and the way we use things to help balance out what we have going on in the body. And, and I have to actually backtrack a little bit, and how I was like, well, there's a time and a place for everything. Yes, there is. And Ayurveda really, when applied correctly, mm-hmm. and I'll say it because we're going to get into coconut versus sesame. When applied correctly, these techniques have been around for over 5,000 years. Mm-hmm. There are so many things that we can change within ourselves by simply just changing what we put into our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of them. So it's actually, the explanation of this is quite simple. And we talk about it when we talk about doing something called abhyanga as well. So the molecules of sesame oil are far smaller than the molecules of most other oils out there. So when the skin or the mucous membranes of the body are slightly heated, hence the swishing around of oil in the mouth for 10 to 20 minutes. How long do you do it for, or not?
I usually aim for 20 minutes, although I've started, sometimes I don't keep track because the oil will expand in your mouth, and you can actually usually sense that, like, okay, now's the time that I should spit it out. So sometimes I do rely more on the guesstimate.
So let's actually give the technique to the audience. They're like, what?
Yeah,
are they
what are you doing?
about?
Why are you doing this? Yeah.
Basically, what we're doing is we're taking sesame oil, about a tablespoon, putting it in the mouth and swishing it around before brushing.
Correct.
It must always happen before brushing. Some people tell me, oh yeah, I swish and then I spit it out on my way out the door. You're still leaving a residue of this oil. And so when you swish it around, you are creating a little heat and friction in the mouth. And this opens the pores to the mucous membranes. So oil is fascinating because what it does is it actually can bind in the epidermis layer of the skin if you're doing a self-oil massage. So the same thing applies in the mucous membranes. So believe it or not, we also like to put sesame oil in the nasal passages, in the eardrums, and also we like to do enemas with sesame oil where you retain it and then you expel it. And what this does is it has a drawing effect. It's slightly stimulating, and it will also pull out from the heat any residue that might be lingering under the dermis, in the epidermis.
Okay.
And so this is what the sesame oil does. Coconut oil, the molecules are far too large. So its efficacy just is not as good. It's not as great. Most of the studies that have been done on coconut oil.
Oh, really?
With inconclusive results.
Oh, wow. That explains so much.
Most of the studies out there. And many dentists out there that I know that really want this to work have also used sesame oil, coconut oil as their control. So that also is
we got to thank Gwyneth Paltrow and also criticize her because, it's people, our friend that you've introduced me to out here was like, I just use coconut oil. And, he's a friend of yours. You know him. It's like we were both like, you gotta go sesame oil, bro.
What are you doing,
man?
What are you doing?
Yeah.
So we use this technique, and actually, believe it or not, not only does it help to it helps to pull out a lot of debris. First of all, that might be stuck between the teeth.
Yeah.
I mean, I know this sounds a little interesting because you're like, but we floss and we do that, but there are particles that are inside of the gums that are very difficult to remove.
I will vouch for this because, for people who are not familiar with this, like I rinse with sesame oil, cold pressed, unrefined, for approximately 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. And I always spit it out into the toilet because I was told you're not supposed to spit it into the sink. And if you want to talk about having some sort of reference or evidence for it doing something, when you spit that out into the toilet, like when it's on the tablespoon and you put it in your mouth, it's like a light yellowish, transparent, translucent liquid, like an oil, like you'd expect. When you spit it out, especially at 20 minutes, and especially, if I haven't brushed yet or whatever, that is like a fully milky fluid. It's completely white. You can't see through it. Like it removes so much. And if it's an inferior oil, it doesn't do it. You just like can see that it's not doing it. And that's the biggest thing that keeps me doing it, is that I can see that something is coming out. And it feels so much better. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you even say you feel something's coming out, because there is also, and I don't know if you've experienced this, so let's just do a little consultation here or not.
Hey, I'm down.
Do you feel sometimes like also things are pulling.
Yep.
Also from like the epigastric region into
100%.
the esophagus. So it's not only removing things, debris, unwanted bacteria from the mouth, but it's also kind of bringing it up from the rest of the body.
Oh, absolutely. Whenever I'm trying to quit smoking, if I go on a bad, like falling off the wagon thing with smoking, and then I try to quit again, and in the week afterwards when I'm oil pulling after all of that horrible smoking, when I spit out the oil, then immediately afterwards, all kinds of gross, smoker's phlegm and stuff just
come to the surface.
Comes to the surface, and I have to spit that out as well.
So believe it or not, I would also even say that if you do have excess phlegm, many of us do, like, we're spitting it, postnasal drip. There's people who have that, and even sometimes like in the back of the throat, you can just kind of feel that lump. Or sometimes you cough and it sounds a little wet. Oh, you have a tendency toward bronchitis. This technique is actually, oil pulling is fantastic for pulling out unwanted mucus from the body as well. So it's an excellent tool. So even during allergy season, my recommendations are sesame oil in the nasal passages, oil pulling, and sesame oil in the ears.
Yeah. Sesame oil in the ears is also a big one. One of my biggest frustrations with just the medical community is how come there's no good consensus on how you're supposed to clean out your ears?
Right.
And again, it's similar to the teeth thing, where I've just been told a bunch of contradictory things over the years. And then, in the era of YouTube, when you can look stuff up, still don't find anything conclusive on like, this is how you're supposed to do it in a safe way.
So Ayurveda uses sesame oil.
And I found that to work, yeah.
And it's a great way to loosen up any wax that might be in the ears or lubricate excess dryness in the ears. If there, of course, is a rupture to your eardrum, do not put oil in your ears.
That is I'm glad you said that, because this is where the confusion happens. It's like I'm a musician. I don't want to mess up my ears. But then I have this wax buildup issue. And also, because I'm trying to protect my hearing, I have in that little cat pouch, I have earplugs that are molded to my ear, right? And I wear that, like if I'm in Bombay and I have to get in an auto rickshaw, like that traffic will deafen you, like if you're exposed to it for long. So I put earplugs in for that. Or if I go to a concert, or if I go to a DJ club gig or whatever, I wear that hearing protection. But if I can't clean my ears efficiently, then that's just gonna further impact that wax, right? What do they call impacted, right?
Right. Yeah.
So this is another thing I'm always trying to figure out. And
so there is also the technique of ear irrigation, which is done by all ENT providers, including Ayurvedic ENT providers.
Okay.
So we also have our areas of focus in Ayurveda. We have our 8 branches of Ayurveda, everything from pediatrics, surgery, ENT, internal medicine, psychiatry, the list goes on. We have ENT as one of our areas. And ear irrigations have been done for at least 5,000 years. And so the removal of wax is also really important. It's just that the oil tends to soften it, so it can be removed a little bit easier.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah. So, don't shy away from using some of these classical techniques that were actually, believe it or not, used a long time ago. Surgery is a great example. I can't tell you how many patients, I want to do it all naturally. I don't want to go for surgery. And then I pull out the 5,000 years ago Shushrut Sangita parasurgery techniques. And I go, cataract surgery was done 5,000 years ago. Different sterilization techniques, but it was still done. Yeah. And so not to shy away from some of these things that are really helpful.
So, one thing I was kind of surprised to find out about you just after coming to Tucson, and surprised because
I'm so cool.
Yeah, well, that's always been a given, but we follow each other on social media and stay in touch, and like I was aware when you opened your clinic in Colorado, like I saw these things happen, but I totally missed that you wrote 2 books. Like I only found that out after coming here, and I was like, how did I miss this? Like I usually pay attention to these things, and I'm generally happy when somebody I care about is creating something and putting something out there into the world. So can you just tell us the names of these of the 2 books and what they're about?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I can't believe you didn't know. I didn't know. Can't believe you missed it. But actually, that's really good feedback.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say.
Where's my marketing team?
That's part of the reason why I brought it up earlier. I think when you had first mentioned, I was like, why don't I know about this? Like it seems like I should,
Right.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. It actually, the books got published right when the pandemic, literally a week after complete shutdown.
Both of them?
Yeah.
Really?
I happened to publish them simultaneously. It was a little bit of an accident.
Yeah.
I was inspired in writing one and suddenly got an inspiration, wrote a second one. And they're 2 very, very different books. Mm-hmm. So the first one actually is a little bit more of a personal book that shaped and changed the way that I practice Ayurveda today. So about 9 years ago, I had a personal tragedy and I lost my husband to a car accident. Mm-hmm. And after that occurred, I really had to stop practicing because I didn't know how to care for other people. I was, in my own place of grief and suffering. When I reemerged from that, I was really able to come back to my practice in such a different way. And not that I wasn't compassionate before, but boy, there's nothing like getting shoved off the ledge to really, make you have more compassion for humanity and the things that people go through in life. And, that at the age of 38, that was like my really first big tragedy of...
You were my age when that happened.
Yeah.
I mean, I just celebrated my birthday with you, my 38th birthday with you here in Tucson.
Yeah.
And we celebrated your birthday as well.
My 47th.
47.
Everyone knows now.
Yeah. Not if we whisper it into these microphones.
So I wrote a book. And what I wrote about was that little gap and a few things that happened after the gap. But that little gap in between where I was like, what the hell do I do now? I decided to go search. And I always had, a little bit of that bent about me anyway of, going on silent meditation retreats and things like that. They were my thing. But I really just decided it's time. Maybe it's time for me to leave the world as I know it. I'm ready to take sannyasi, in that, which basically means, just renounce the material world and go live in a hut in the foothills of Bhutan.
That resonates with me very much. I've had that thought many a time.
Yeah. And so I went and searched, and I searched medicine men and medicine women and yogis and holy men and monks. And I wrote 8 chapters, and they're all stories about these, every single person I met along the way and how I was looking for something, and what they showed me was really eye-opening in my experience of life. Yeah. And the name of the book is called Peaks and Valleys, because there's no like happy conclusion at the end, like and then she met somebody new in her life and happily ever after, because that's not really how life goes.
That's not how life works at all, as we tend to find out.
Yeah. Yep. And there will be more death, and there will be more life, and there will be all kinds of things that happen. And how do we dance with those changes? And so I wrote a book for, it's just for anyone really grieving, and how these questions come up. They come up for all of us. There's guilt, there's grief, there's anger, there's sadness. And the book really takes you sort of through all of it, plus the confusion. And it just happens to be through my eyes of, a 38-year-old Indian woman who didn't know what to do next.
Yeah.
And so Peaks and Valleys. So that's the first book I wrote, and it helped me formulate a module where I teach and talk to people about grief from a psycho-spiritual perspective.
Peaks and Valleys is a good title.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other book is a culinary book, no?
It is.
Yeah.
So the other book I wrote is called My Mother's Ayurvedic Kitchen. And there's actually four authors.
Okay.
One author is deceased. It's actually my grandmother. So the
Okay.
book actually takes us through. It's a story with recipes, and it takes us through food sustainability. So how my grandmother in her day made all these recipes that are classic to our part of India, and how she chose the vegetables and how she chose the ingredients and what time of year to eat it and how to prepare it and who to make it for. And then how my mother left India at the age of 19, moved to Newfoundland, Canada, where there was only cabbage and potatoes and cauliflower available for her, and how she had to learn how to take all these things and make brand new recipes, but still maintain the Indian recipes from our part of India.
Your mom cooks very well. I mean,
cooks
it's
well.
really, I can attest to this.
Talk about adaptation, sustainable adaptation, right? And then how I came along and I learned Ayurveda. And I love all my recipes from my part of India, Gujarati food, and how I brought it to the US. And then learning about farmers markets and where we live and why we live in the places we do and how to cook those recipes with the food that's available to me here using the Ayurvedic principles. So like once upon a time, we'd ask my grandmother, like, well, why can't we eat this in the winter? And she'd say, because we just don't. But now, and my mom was a little softer about it. I don't know. That's just what Ba said. And then I learned, that's why we don't eat tomatoes in the middle of winter. They aren't available.
Right. Well, fair. That's the practical explanation.
Right. And it really comes down to how beautifully nature provides for us. Like, earlier today I was telling you, like, we have no business eating salads in the middle of winter.
I know. You said that to me before we started recording. I was like, what are you saying?
He was like, this is madness.
I thought I figured this whole nutrition thing out. And you're telling me I can't eat salad in the winter?
And it really just comes down to this idea of like, that's not when they are available to us. That's not when they're best for, and they're cooling by nature, right?
Yeah.
You eat a cold salad in the middle of winter, you're just stopping the digestion. You're creating a constriction. So you want to have like warm soups and stews and things like that help to bring warmth and nourish the body, especially for your Vata constitution. Especially.
Okay.
So like I have to tell you the story. So when I moved to Colorado, I don't know, 16, 17, 18 years ago.
Okay.
I remember moving there. And so if anybody has ever been to Colorado, every single town there is just mountain towns. And people in mountain towns like to eat a lot of meat and they like to drink a lot of beer. So I call my Ayurvedic teacher in India and I go, this place, I don't know how I'm going to live here. Everybody eats a lot. Now, keep in mind, I'm 10 generations vegetarian, right?
Wow.
10 generations.
That makes sense, but it's when you actually say that number and you really put into context how long 10 generations goes back, that's kind of something. Hey?
It's insane. My parents have traced our 10 generations back to show me that this is why we're vegetarian.
We have confirmed they were all vegetarians.
In case you were thinking otherwise, right? And so I call my Ayurvedic and I'm like, everybody here eats a lot of meat and they drink a lot of beer. And he's very quiet and he asks me one question. What's the elevation? And I said, well, it's almost 7,000 feet above sea level here. Yes. They're eating the yak and the goat. And I was like, well, not yak and goat, but like elk and venison. Yeah. And there's some buffalo, around too. And he said, yes, they're practicing Ayurveda. And he said, what do they drink? Are they drinking the ale with the flowers? And I was like, the flowers? What is he talking about? Hops.
Oh.
So when you live in a high, dry climate in the middle of winter when it's cold, your body needs saturated fat. Period. Saturated fat comes from animals. So you've got dairy, you've got eggs, you have chicken, you have beef, elk, venison, goat, yak. You have to choose what's sustainable in your environment, and that's what you eat. And
According to Ayurveda.
What
Get
else
yourself some elk.
Man, what else are you going to eat in the
Yeah.
middle of winter in Colorado at 7,000 feet above sea level? And then the hops. Oh, the bitter hops helps to digest all that meat.
Wow. There you go.
Yeah.
That's a great story. It's really amazing how if you pay attention to your body, and also if you eliminate a lot of synthetic things, your body will just start to tell you what to eat. I had this experience when I started doing yoga. For me, mutton is like an exotic thing. Like mom would never make mutton curry at home. So when I'm in India, I really like ordering mutton curry. And there's this epic place in Bombay called Jai Hind Lunch House in Bandra. And so after yoga, I would always go to Jai Hind Lunch House and treat myself to one of their thalis. And I would always get the mutton thali. And as I continued doing yoga, I was doing it 3 times a week. And then every day after yoga, I would just go and I would get this mutton thali. And it would be the best thing ever. And then after some months, I was starting to get sick of this. It's like, okay, I get it. You know, I'm having the same thing every day after yoga. Like, let's try something else. And I decided to order the fish thali, and they give you like wonderful fish fry, and all the other stuff is the same. Some chapatis and rotis and some curry. And so this was great. The fish thali was amazing. And then for some time there in the middle, I was alternating. One day I'd get the mutton thali, another time I'd get the fish thali. But after a short time of this alternating, my body really started to favor the fish thali. And I could no longer, there would be instances where I would order the mutton thali, I couldn't finish it. It was too much, too heavy. And the fish protein, like my body was just like, yeah, this is what you want, this is what you need. And I'm Bengali, we have lots of fish in our ancestral diet. And another example of listening to your body, and it's interesting that it coincides with me taking up a yoga practice, because before taking up a yoga practice, I never had this notion of like, listen to your body. That whole, body scan meditation that you do at the end of yoga, it was revelatory for me, right? And then I also noticed this with sugar. Like I'm trying to eliminate refined sugar. If I'm successful for like 2 weeks, that first Snickers bar that you have after 2 weeks, you can feel that run like jolting through your veins. Like I feel that more than many other substances that you, I guess, should feel.
And then the same time the next day, exactly the same time next day, your body's going to go, I sure wish I had a Snickers right now.
Look at that donut right there. That's what that's about.
I saw it.
Yeah.
I saw it over there.
Because it's, I was hoping I would eat a little healthier, but mostly I've just been indulging in the American foods that are not readily available in India. So certainly a lot of the burgers have been happening, and certainly lots of Dr. Pepper. But there's an interesting question I asked you, which I would like you to share. What you said. There's this idea of your ancestral diet, right? Like you 10 generations vegetarian, and then there's this other notion of the regional diet. Like where are you right now? And for generations and generations, those things usually just coincided. But now we live in a globalized world where that doesn't necessarily coincide. As you mentioned, 10 generations vegetarian, you're in Colorado. All of a sudden, elk and beer is like what's going on. For, a Gujarati, that's a scary thought, maybe.
Right.
At least on paper, that should not work.
Well, let me tell you part 2 of the story.
Let's go.
And it involves number 2.
Here we go. Let's do it.
It's a good one. So essentially, thank you for asking. Thank you for asking. I can't wait to share this. So essentially, basically, what happened was I was like, oh, I live in Colorado in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
I should I should be eating meat.
Yeah.
And, my Ayurvedic teacher kind of confirmed that. He said, desh and kal, time and place and time.
Right.
It's critical in Ayurveda. Critical. Yeah. These are important pieces when you're discussing your diet and health. Mm-hmm. Where do you live and what is the time frame? So I'm like, great, I'm going to do it. So I go out.
And so had you been eating meat up to this point?
No, I'd never eaten meat.
Ever?
So I tasted it here and there, and but it never had been part.
Okay.
No.
It's a big deal. It's a huge deal.
It's a big deal.
It's a huge deal, yeah.
So I had a steak.
Oh, you just went for it.
I just went for it.
Yeah.
I was like, I live here.
Yeah.
I live here. I actually got a hold of some elk, and I ate an elk steak.
Okay.
And I didn't love it because I asked people's advice on how to eat it, and bad advice. People said, you should have it well done. I now know that I like meat when it's the opposite of well done.
Rare.
As rare as possible. But again, let me finish the story so I could tell you how it all kind of came about. So I ate the whole thing. And I didn't have a bowel movement for a week. It was horrible.
10 generations vegetarian.
It was horrible. It was horrible.
Wow.
And I was like, what the hell, man? This sucks. Like, I remember thinking how odd it was because I ate the meat and then there were still things left on the plate, right? There was the vegetables and then the mashed potatoes.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's still more food? And as a vegetarian, right, I'm used to eating like the vegetables and the mashed potatoes, but not the meat. So I couldn't understand how all this food could
just goes together. Yeah.
But somehow I put it all together and that was no bowel movement for a week. And then, of course, I called my Ayurvedic teacher. And
I bet you did.
And I said, this is not working. Yeah. And he said, Amita, you eat small amount. Don't eat the whole elk.
Wow.
And so I learned quickly, oh, right. So let me check in with my body. And I did it out of novelty, right? But like you were saying, you were doing your yoga practice. And, I did it more like, oh, my principles say, let's do this. But then I'm
going to go all in. I want your biggest steak. Give me the biggest one you got. Yeah.
And cook the crap out of it.
Yeah. There's that. Well, that touches on a lot of things because, I don't have a plan to give up eating meat, but certainly the notion of eating less meat, and especially when I get into that habit of having smaller quantities of meat or just having less meals in my week that are more focused around meat, I start to feel amazing. And I like having flexibility in the idea of cutting down on meat rather than I have to stop eating meat as of today. That doesn't work so well for me.
Yeah, and people who don't eat meat, we support that as well, right? So even though I chose to eat more sustainably. So then, I had no business eating meat in the summer, but I would eat little bits then in the winter from there onward. Anyone who came to me and said, I just don't eat meat and I don't want to, religious purposes, ethical reasons, whatever the purpose for the person was, sometimes it's physiological. If you eat a lot of saturated fat, you will have a gallbladder attack.
Again, comes down to also constitution. Like the advice for a specific person would be different. You don't just make these general. Exactly.
Yeah. And kaphas actually technically can in their lives be vegans. I don't suggest anybody put themselves in a box with their diet in any way, shape, or form, but kaphas can get away with eating the least amount of saturated fat simply because they already have a thick mucous membrane covering throughout their entire body. Whereas vatas, I would really recommend that saturated fat be a huge part of their life.
Really?
And
that's good to know.
They eat it on a regular basis. It's usually pittas who are the ones who are militant about wanting to eat mostly meat and less of the complex carbohydrates, and they really need to create a nice balance for themselves.
You touched on diets and rigidity around diets. I remember you saying that you kind of like to deconstruct whatever diet is out there, or if somebody's kicking one particular diet, you kind of like to, what would be the word? Be a bit of a devil's advocate. Am I correct there, or?
I do. I like to at least help people understand why they're picking up the diets that they are and why it's making them feel good. Like, I'll give you a great example.
Okay.
Vegans, for example. Many times, I know a lot of vegans who really talk quite a bit about the value of not having any saturated fat in their diet. And getting the micronutrients they need and eating the food that they need to eat. And then on the other end of the spectrum are those who eat more of a paleo type of diet. And they are advocates of meats and saturated fats and lots of fats of every kind, and less on the complex carbohydrates, if none at all, less than 20 grams of saturated fat a day, or complex carbohydrates a day. And they both claim that they feel so good. You know that joke of, how do you know if somebody's a vegan? How do you know if somebody's paleo? They'll tell you, right? Yeah. Because they really do genuinely feel really, really, really good. And one of the things I tell everyone, I'm like, yeah, you know what they have in common? You know what they both have in common? Neither of them mix their complex carbohydrates with their saturated fats. Because when you mix both together, both of these food groups in Ayurveda are considered kaphic. They increase kapha. They increase heaviness, lethargy, blocks in the body, sluggishness of the mind, and weight gain. They both sit in those categories if eaten in excess. But if eaten in moderation, it's healthy kapha. It's healthy bone building, muscle building, getting all the nutrients that you need. So what these two groups have done is they've just gone to the extreme, and they've said, let's just cut this whole one out. Let's cut that whole one out. And they lived happily ever after. And I tell people that all the time. Yeah, fine, pick a group. Or you could just cut down on your meat and your complex carbohydrates.
Right.
But sometimes if someone is overly sluggish and has obesity and a lot of these kaphic types of disorders, going to the extreme is very helpful in the beginning.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. I see what you. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
And that's why. So then people have all these results, and then they feel great, and then.
Right.
Excuse me.
Right. So that's where I like to deconstruct. Like, hey, what do we eat? Oh, why is that affecting you that way? What would make you feel better? How long have you been doing this? What happened when you came off of the diet? Yeah. And every person is different. So that's why you will find some people gravitating more toward veganism and some people gravitating more toward the more paleo or keto. And they are very specifically different constitutions that are doing that.
Interesting. Before we started, you mentioned, it kind of ties in with this whole idea of regional. Like regionalism, and you'd mentioned, I even in your first book, how you've met with medicine men, certain people from indigenous communities in the, I guess the region, the area that we're in. I don't know how to define its boundaries properly. And so, I mean, can you tell me a little bit more about those experiences and maybe how they tie into your practice and your thinking more generally?
Yeah, I was really very honored that after the first year of moving to Colorado, I was approached by a tribe that is there called the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. And they came to me and they were looking for somebody in their own small division that they had created for themselves and helping their population get healthier. And they wanted to work with someone who worked with nutrition that didn't look at things from a conventional standpoint, but looked at it more from a cultural standpoint.
Okay.
And I was absolutely honored. I understand, just like in India, indigenous tribes too, like you're happy, you eat. You're sad, you eat. You're grieving, you eat. Everything happens around the table, right? Families come together that way. So, to really sit down and work with a population and ask them to okay, now it's time to eat asparagus and salmon. This is not, it doesn't make sense, especially because we're not acknowledging or looking to see what actually is indigenous in that area, and over generations what has happened. Where was that food scarcity, what came in? So great, lucky for me, I got to learn a lot. And one of the fascinating things I learned was that a lot of their old cultures around food that they have in place, but also they don't know or remember why, are very much similar to Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine. And so that was the first tribe that I got a chance to work with. And then I would go to these conferences and I would talk to other tribes and their nutritionists there and understand what they were eating. So that helped me to understand not only the way that they ate, but also regionally how their bodies were different, what foods they could eat. Some, really some tribes came from plains and some tribes came from the mountains. It's the same idea, right? We came from farming communities. You came from fishing communities. This is the same concept that follows through. And so that was such a wonderful experience. And, throughout my travels there, I also, had a chance to meet with a lot of spiritual teachers who really reminded me of my connection to the spirits all around, and how, yes, I talk a lot about it in terms of food, but talking about it in terms of yourself, now that right there is where the magic is.
Yeah, that's quite something. Well, shit, we've covered a lot of topics. There's also the mental health aspect of things and how it all ties into that. And I mean, that's also a huge topic. And mental health is interesting because there's this whole category called wellness, which seems like a more of a difficult, ephemeral category. Then there's the idea of prevention and intervention. And, I guess Western medicine has focused a lot on intervention. And then the prevention is, I don't know, does prevention start to then merge into wellness? And then does wellness start to merge into things like yoga and exercise? And it's a bit of a blurry continuum. But then where does mental health fit into that? And then how what does your Ayurvedic training have to, what kind of perspective does it give on that?
Yeah. So I appreciate you asking, and it's a huge topic. And, I won't get into the expansive explanation of particular treatments that we do, because it ranges everywhere from, like you said, prevention, intervention. We have everything from food therapy, herbal therapy, smoke therapy, hallucinogens, treatments that we do.
What hallucinogens are we talking about in the Ayurvedic context?
Let me interrupt you for one moment, please.
Absolutely. Please, I want to know this information before you continue.
I was like, should I say it? Yes, we actually, we use a few. So marijuana, in the classical texts, we refer to it as something called soma.
Soma, right, yeah.
Soma. And this is a big question a lot of people ask me. So if you refer to the classical text, it's written in different ways, and it can be interpreted in different ways.
But does it always appear as the word soma?
Soma.
Okay.
But it is interpreted in many ways. So keep in mind, all the natural plants in the world, provide us with the ability to be able to expand the mind. I'm really fortunate. I've had a chance with the medicine man to partake in peyote ceremony. And so it was really just a very clear way for me to see how I was using what was in the environment to help me expand my mind. I wouldn't be using something else from another part of the world. So like this goes back to maybe like, I don't know, ayahuasca. We really need to honor the home of ayahuasca and where it is and how we utilize it.
Yeah.
So where does it grow? So we do, there marijuana. Also, poppies are often used as well in Ayurvedic literature and hashish.
Okay. I just want to clarify, because I may have missed it. When you mentioned ayahuasca a minute ago, we're saying that's not mentioned in the Vedic text.
It's not.
It's not. Okay. Right.
No, it's not. It's not regional.
Because, of course, because it's not, yeah.
To that part of it, right? So it's not mentioned in there, but the principles of ayahuasca
could still be
applied, just not, it wasn't there. That's why a lot of times, like these Indian texts, you read them, like one of the funniest lines out of one of the texts that I actually love is like, after a man and a woman make love, the woman should make her man boil him some hot milk with some saffron and ghee, and then take him up to the rooftop under the full moon and adorn him with pearls.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so these things that are in the text there are also time and place. Who was doing what part of what job at that time.
Right.
They had rooftops that you could go walk up to in the moonlight.
That was more about the cultural context of the time rather than...
It was. But the concept is that men lose a little bit more of their vital fluids. We call it ojas in Ayurveda. And so to replenish them, saturated fat is very important.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It doesn't matter who makes it for them.
Yeah.
And the full moon is very cooling.
Yeah.
And pearls are very cooling. And so to calm the mind and the spirit and to take in some saturated fat is oftentimes recommended after intercourse.
Something to keep in mind.
So time and place is very important.
Yeah.
So even when we talk about hallucinogens, even when we talk about herbs, anything we talk about, it may have started in the classical texts in India, but if we look at the concept of them, this is where deconstructing and understanding what's really being said.
So you understand the essence of the principles, and then if you go to a different part of the world in a different time, you can apply those principles because you've understood them at a more abstract and essential level. So now you're in a different part of the world in a different time, Colorado or Arizona, and you're able to look at the environment and the story about the elk and having that steak for the first time versus figuring out better quantities for yourself and adjusting. That would be an example of that.
Exactly.
Do you still do that? Are you still seasonally a non-vegetarian, or how do you approach this? And also, you live in Arizona now part of the year, and in Colorado another. So how does your diet change, whether you're in Arizona, whether you're in Colorado, and how much of that is the region versus, and then also the climate, time of year, that kind of thing? Right.
Yeah. So here in Arizona, I really don't eat a lot of meat. If it ends up in something, if somebody serves me meat, like we went to our friend's house the other day, you were with me.
Yep.
And we got there and he had made steaks and chicken and a salad. And I was like, I was looking and I was like, boy, I really am hungry. I could just eat the salad, but I'm really hungry and I need something else.
Yeah.
And so I ate the steak. I didn't tell you, but I'll tell you now that everybody else is listening too. It took me a couple of days to get regular again. I was
these are the, the difficult choices we have to make.
Whereas if it had been the winter time, my body actually, believe it or not, would have done so much better with it.
Interesting.
But because it's summer, my digestion is already really sluggish, and it's slow. It is, we have to wait till it gets dark to eat because it's so hot, and your body doesn't really crave any food, and you're eating later. So for the most part here in Arizona, I actually eat khichdi most of the winter. It's warm and nourishing, right? It gets a little colder. It's the desert cold, right? So I'll eat khichdi and sauteed veggies and rice and maybe a coconut curry. It's not like super cold, but it'll still kind of keep me a little bit warm.
Do you do white rice?
Yeah, I love white rice.
Okay.
Yeah, it's my favorite. Should I do brown rice? Sure, I could.
Sure.
Why not?
Why not?
But for the most part, sometimes temperature dictates what I eat with winter and summer. But when I go to Colorado, it's still pretty warm there in the summer times.
Okay.
Yeah, so I tend to eat a little bit just summery type foods. And then, but if I'm there in the winter, I'm eating a lot of warmer, heartier things, and I make like elk chili and things like that.
Okay. Wow. I got to try some elk.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It is. I like it. I think it's I like it. It tastes good.
Yeah. I was gonna ask you how it compares to beef steak. We're not in India, so I'm allowed to say such things. But
you might have some listeners in India.
Yeah, the listeners won't care. But but you're also Gujarati, so I was like, should I even ask you?
Oh yeah, you could totally ask me. Yeah, I'm.
Yeah, I know, but it's
It is beef is even if it's a lean beef, it has a different fatty flavor to it, whereas elk is very lean and a little on the gamey side. You like mutton, right?
Yeah.
Mutton's very gamey. Mutton's very hard on me though. I find I can't smell it. The smell is not for me.
I've developed a bit of an aversion over time. Like when I first moved to India, I loved the mutton curries, especially the really light mutton curries that you can get Maharashtrian style, or just a light gravy. I don't like the overly thick stuff. But one thing that is more apparent and in your face when you move to India is that the butcher shops are just out in the open. They're slicing and dicing this stuff up right in front of you and giving you your chicken or whatever it is. And near one of my best friends' homes in Bombay, there is a mutton shop. And whenever I would go to the store to get, whatever, a drink or a pack of smokes or whatever we want to get, I'd have to walk past this mutton shop, and the smell from that mutton shop was so intense that slowly it started to put me off mutton, because you could get that hint of that butcher shop smell in the curry, in that gaminess, right yep. in that gaminess. And after a while, I was just like, it was just reminding me too much of the. And it's not so much that it is a butcher shop; it is just the smell of that particular shop was so strong and off-putting. That it's put me off mutton a bit.
So goat can do that too. I get goat milk sometimes. We know our goat lady friend here, but it is different. It's not as gamey, I think, as that, but it just does have a little bit of a gamey or kind of. But it's beef, but gamier. I don't know. I'm a 10-generation vegetarian. My explanation of meat.
You're doing a great job of explaining
Not as gamey, but gamier and similar to. Okay, so by the way, we went off track.
Yeah,
I don't know how that happened.
That's okay.
But one of the things I wanted to talk about in terms of mental health, and I don't want to get too far outside of it because there is so much to talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot.
But we talked about hallucinogens a little bit, and then there's
That's how we got off track.
right. And then there's the strict spiritual practices that are really really intense. And those are the things I like to do for myself. So I do those strict spiritual practices for my own mental health. Like I do a dance in the middle of nowhere for 3 days and 3 nights with no food and no water.
Well, okay, so you've told me about this a number of times, and it sounds intense. So now it makes me, I'm wondering about the meaning of the word strict in this instance. Because this 3 days and no food, no water thing in the desert, that is a ritual that is regional to this place that we're here, right?
It's regional to a lot of native tribes in North America.
Well, so there you go. So what I'm trying to get at is presumably when you say that there are these strict spiritual practices, that is also like some of the other principles we were talking about, more of an abstract framework where you can come to North America and the indigenous practice that you're able to engage in, that can then, like you're still able to look at that from an Ayurvedic point of view.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if I wasn't doing this, then I would be standing on a mountaintop somewhere in the Himalayas with one leg up, trying to balance for 10 days straight.
Right. So it's that notion of struggling against something.
Right. And it's less about the struggle and it's more about the surrender. When you put your body through an intense and vigorous process where you feel that there's no hope and you are not going to make it, automatically the body begins to shed all of the things that no longer serve it. And it starts with all the crap in our heads. And so it's a really harsh way of changing our perspective. Very similar to maybe in this day and age how we talk about microdosing. It just shifts us out of the thing that we once were debilitated by no longer debilitates us because we have something greater to be debilitated by, which is like your sheer existence as on this planet as a human being. And the purpose of that really is to shake you and to just make you laugh at yourself and surrender. And that's the purpose of all of these very strict forms that of therapy we do in Ayurveda. There's also yoga therapy, which is a beautiful way of reminding the body to stay connected to the self. So there is that as well. And then, lastly, we have the actual panchakarma treatments where we apply medicated oils and other types of treatments. We can create these hats on the head and we pour medicated oils in. We actually shave a patient's head and allow it to absorb some of the herbs that are necessary to help shift the mind perspective or nourish the mind or give the body what it needs. So this mental health aspect, and then of course we tie nutrition in with that. And for our diagnosis, so just so your audience knows, we talked about the doshas, and maybe this is a great place to kind of swing it all back to that first thing that we talked about, is that in Ayurveda, we not only have Vat, Pitta, Kapha as predominance in our physical constitution, but we also have Vat, Pitta, Kapha predominant in our mental constitution. And so I give myself as an example. If any of the viewers saw me, they would say, oh yeah, she's kapha, we can see that. But as you're listening to me, you'll notice that I'm very pitta. My job all day is to sit and problem solve and articulate. I love sitting. I love problem solving and articulating.
You're good at all of that.
And I have to be careful that I don't sit too much and I have to be careful that I don't problem solve too much. And to create that balance means to find the things in nature that can help balance that out so that then I can continue to dance with the changes depending upon the climate I'm living in or the region of the world that I exist.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great way to tie it back together. I guess maybe the last thing I'd want to ask you is just when it comes to misconceptions around this. Like, I guess if we could just tie it back to misconceptions, because I think people probably do have a myriad different types of misconceptions about Ayurveda, probably from multiple angles, probably from the people that are maybe only into it, and then the people that reject it completely, and just generally, what misconceptions, if any, do you think are out there, and what would you like people to? Because I'm sure a lot of people feel confused when they hear that word. They don't know maybe what to do, how to.
It's become more popular.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
I think when people hear the word Ayurveda, they immediately go to the doshas, and then they identify with one of the doshas. Oh, I'm Vata.
Yeah.
Or I'm Pitta, or I'm Kapha. And this is all of that. So the misconception that I would like to bring to the table is there are really two aspects of Ayurveda. There's the aspect that I encourage everybody to study on their own. Learn about your constitution. Learn about what you need to do to balance it. Learn about daily routines, oil pulling, putting oil in a lot of the other orifices of your body. What to do regarding your exercise and why you are the way that you are. Great. Use those as wonderful tools and see if you can find things that can help balance you. And then the other part of Ayurveda is really the part where we practice medicine. So this is not part of daily routines. It is part of seeing a problem and using the understanding of the disease process or pathology to be able to find the right herbs, or maybe food as medicine if the disease stage hasn't gone on too long, and using it that way. So my encouragement to all the listeners out there is that if you are searching for something that you want to do that's outside of the norm of your primary care physician, and would like to study more about this, find a good provider who can also talk to you about the disease process, the stages. They're happy to work with your primary care physician. Find somebody who can not only explain to you. Actually, I contradict myself. I refer out a lot to people who can explain the basics of Ayurveda. But if you find someone who's available to explain the basics of Ayurveda for you, and then help you work on what your problem is simultaneously, then you can find someone who can be reasonable with your health. Ask the questions. How much Western medicine are you familiar with? How much Ayurvedic medicine are you familiar with? How long did you go to school for? Even in my world, I'll defend Ayurveda till the end, but I also hold myself and all my fellow providers accountable. We are not here to be right. We are here to help the patient be happy and healthy. And when we do that, that is what makes us a true Ayurvedic doctor. That's our only job, is to make the patient happy and healthy, not to be right. If I recommend that somebody go to the ER, because they're about to have a heart attack, then I've done my job as an Ayurvedic doctor.
Right. That just made me think of when you first were telling me about referring people out, and there was like a specific type of patient that you might refer out who's just immediately just. Or only wants to know about the doshas and all this kind of thing, and you might say, well, actually, if that's what you're looking for. Now, am I remembering that correctly? And could you maybe share that tidbit again, and maybe then we'll Call it.
I I really, these beautiful techniques and understanding of Ayurveda, this is the foundation of what we all learn in school. So whether you have a 2-year training or a 4-year training or an 8-year training, this understanding of the doshas, it is really the fundamental aspect. And not just the doshas in terms of your constitution, but also how we see it in the food we eat and herbs and all that. So for that purpose, if there's someone who just wants to have an introduction to Ayurveda, I know some wonderful providers around the whole country that I will refer to. I just work in a really specific way because of the experiences that I've had studying classical Ayurveda, starting in India, and then coming here to the States. Because psychiatry and internal medicine are my specialty, the big question I ask my patients when they show up or they want a consultation is I say, are you willing to do all the work? And that doesn't mean you have to keep coming back and seeing me or you have to sign up for anything weird. It's just, are you going to be comfortable when I ask you all the questions? So if you come in just for mental health, are you going to be okay when I ask you what your diet's like? And if you come in just to talk to me about a digestive disorder, are you going to be all right if I ask you about your marriage? These are the pieces that a lot of us, we don't have time to ask, or we don't have the wherewithal to be able to say, I think I want to delve into all of these pieces. And so what I like to do is work with patients who say, yes, I want the whole thing. I want the whole package, because that's what Ayurveda is.
Holistic.
It's mind, body, and spirit.
Right.
And so because I find so much value in reminding myself that it's all one, I find that there's so much greater value in being able to help my patients when I can come to the table that way as well. And that's when I do the referring out. Because if someone says, no, I have a counselor, or no, I don't really want to talk about my cholesterol, I just want to know about my dosha, then I say, absolutely. Like, there are so many wonderful preventative things that you could do for your health. And I'd love to guide you in the direction of someone who could help you with that.
Right. Well, how are you feeling?
I feel pretty good. I feel like we covered a lot of topics.
We did. There's still lots of stuff I want to ask you, but it's
personal. It's personal.
Well, maybe. I mean, I feel like you might be willing to share some things, but it's what you're feeling in terms of tiredness and time.
I think we could probably wrap it up.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. In that case, we can always do another one. I think I'm going to be back in Tucson. I've had such a lovely time here. And thank you so much, not just for agreeing to do the podcast. I was thinking about having you on the podcast before I was thinking about coming here to Arizona. I remember, I think I sent you a message several months ago. So obviously, thanks for being on the podcast. I'm glad we get to do it in person. I didn't have any expectation that we were going to get to do it in person. Here we are. And thanks so much for looking after me and helping me out during this crazy global pandemic situation. And,
it's been really good.
Yeah.
And like I told you too, one of the things that you being Vata, let's bring it back to Ayurveda. You having more of that Vata nature, and me having more of the Kapha nature. I think we both gave each other the opportunity to experience the other side of it. So I think I gave you kapha. I gave you some stability and some routine, and okay, here's this and here's this and here's that. And you took me out of my comfort zone, and really, not just who you are as a person, but also your energy. So I have various friends in Tucson, and the friends that recently have kind of I've reconnected with, and then you've connected with, they also bring that very light, airy energy that I sometimes don't have in my life. So I really appreciate it, because we can all be Vata, we can all be Pitta, we can all be Kapha. It's just that when do we bring these things out? And it's always nice to just see the other side of things.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's call it there, I guess.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. I listened to some of your other podcasts.
Which one did you listen to?
So I don't remember his name. You sent me.
I sent you one a while back. Hey. Well, we can go check which one that is.
And so I feel like we didn't laugh as much as you.
They're all quite different. We did laugh a bit,
About bowel movements.
Bowel movement. There were some other laughs. I wouldn't worry too much about that. They're all quite different from one another. Some are very very silly, and others are. I mean, you got to strike a balance because you're a serious practitioner. It can't all just be jokes.
Fun and games. It can't all be a one big joke.
Absolutely. But we've had fun. I'm gonna hit